This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans. We are joined today by Lisa Marchiano, who's a writer and Jungian analyst in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's been in practice for over 20 years, and since 2016, she's had a special interest in gender and has worked clinically with gender dysphoric young people, parents of trans-identified youth, and detransitioners. Her peer-reviewed papers on gender have appeared in Psychological Perspectives and the Journal of Analytical Psychology. Her writings have also appeared in Quillette and Arrow. Lisa contributed chapters to the books Transgender Children and Young People, Born in Your Own Body, and Inventing Transgender Children and Young People. She's presented on the topic of gender dysphoria both in the U.S. as well as internationally. Lisa co-hosts the popular weekly depth psychology podcast, This Jungian Life. Her book, Motherhood, Facing and Finding Yourself, won the 2021 Best Book Award sponsored by American Book Fest in the parenting and family category. Please join us for a conversation with Lisa Marchiano.
All right. Welcome back to Transparency, everyone. I'm Aaron Kimberly here with my co-host, Aaron Terrell, and we are excited to welcome Lisa to the show. Thank you for joining us today, Lisa.
Really glad to be here.
I have a perception that you are among the first, earliest to sort of draw attention to a topic that we've touched on in our podcast, this topic of a psychic epidemic. And that's not something that I personally know a lot about, but you were one of the first to kind of speak publicly some of your concerns about what's happening with youth identifying as trans. What were some of the things that you were seeing in the early days that started to kind of make you concerned that something was amiss?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess maybe I want to start with this term of social contagion, and then I'll kind of go into where I saw that. So first of all, I'm aware that the term social contagion has taken on a pretty negative cast. I've heard some people say that that metaphor of a contagion implies that, that this is an illness or a disease, that being trans is like a disease. And, that's not how the term is intended. It's an old term. It's been around for a long time, and it describes the way that a lot of social things are communicable in a way that we don't really fully understand. There's this wonderful book that's a few years old now called Strange Contagion. I definitely recommend people taking a look at that. There's another book by Nicholas Christakis called Connected, which kind of goes over some of the same territory. And we know that divorce, weight gain, happiness, are all, in other words, any number of human feeling, attitude, behavior can be incredibly communicable. So, for example, if you have a friend if there's a friend of yours in your network who gets divorced, you are more likely to get divorced. And, there's been lots of research on this in actual, connections between people, but also even on social media. I'm aware that there was this research a number of years ago about, if you're interacting with unhappy people on social media, you're more likely to become unhappy. Something like that. I'm probably paraphrasing it badly, but this is not new news. In other words, in fact, one of the earliest known, when this was talked about early on, it was known as the young Werther effect, because the German romanticist Goethe had this novel called Young Werther, and at the end of it, the protagonist killed himself, and it became a very popular book, and there were a number of young Werther type suicides after it. So we've known about this for a long time, and again, suicide is one of the behaviors that we know is so socially communicable. such that there are guidelines about how suicide should be reported on in the media when a famous person commits suicide. There are guidelines that journalists should use in order to minimize the potential for copycat suicides. And this is not a new idea. In other words, it's been around for a long time. And as a therapist, I was familiar with this because obviously, we know that suicide is, I'm going to say contagious. I'm just going to use that language. We know that suicide is contagious. We know that there's a sort of a communicable aspect to things like eating disorders. So I already just kind of had that. And then I started seeing this honestly first in my kids' social group. So I live in Philadelphia, and I live in a very kind of liberal lefty neighborhood in Philadelphia. So I live in a really blue neighborhood in a really blue city, and we're kind of lefty people, and we have all these kind of lefty friends, and my kids kind of went to this lefty school. And they were kind of coming home with these reports about all of these friends who were suddenly identifying as trans. And I also was working with parents of adolescents who were coming in with similar stories. That was enough for me. I mean, I'm old enough that that I had been aware of decades before when being trans was quite rare. So to all of a sudden have it coming in multiple reports from my kids and multiple reports from my clients, it was like, that's it. There's something in the water here. Something's going on.
What year was that?
That would have been, I want to say, like 2015.
Okay. Yep. All right.
I'm trying to remember when Lisa Littman released her study on the phenomenon. Was that before or after?
That was
18.
That was
2018, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually, Lisa and I had started talking in 2016, and we were comparing notes. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aaron.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah. When if you look at the graph on when the like the kind of the Rajdi explosion, it's like 2015 is just when it just skyrockets. It's been growing since about 2010, and then it yeah.
Well,
so yeah, what hit the water at that time?
Part of it was Caitlyn Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner was 2015. I also think that sort of patient zero here was probably Jazz Jennings. And I don't know, I don't remember right now exactly when the reality TV show started, but Jazz Jennings had been in the media. I think the first Barbara Walters interview was when she was 6. And so that would have been like around 2007, something like that. But so there was something cooking in the early 2000s, especially about like these little trans kids, most of whom were natal male. There was something cooking around that. So there were lots of strands, weren't there? There were many things going on.
It's interesting that a couple of really high-profile trans women, that it was young girls that were seeing something in that, natal females were, so it's, even though it wasn't high-profile trans men necessarily, but it was still the females that picked up on that idea.
You're right. That is really interesting, isn't it? That the high profile stuff were mostly trans girls or trans women, but it really sort of took hold in this online ecosystem that was predominantly populated by natal females.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to, hopefully, with this artificial intelligence study, I hope we'll start to piece some of that together, right? How it went from these really high-profile topical news stories to social media and conversations. Because that's the piece I think that is missing, is that translation piece into the girls and social media and how the conversations evolved.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And my understanding is that the kind of earliest iteration of this on social media was probably before 2015. So I forget when Tumblr launched, but I want to say it was like 2012, 2013, something like that. And that is where I think the first place that you found, these kind of young, often tween natal females kind of coming in touch with this ideology. And so what happened, in 2015 was the year it sort of exploded in the media, I think. But
Mhm.
what was going on? You guys, was a really interesting point. I don't have much insight about it, although maybe if I think about it, something will occur to me. What was going on around 2012, let's say, where this ideology kind of found its way to Tumblr? I'm not
I
sure
think
about that.
for one element is same-sex marriage was legalized in the U.S. and that was like a major, I think like kind of like a major civil rights turning point. And I wonder part of that had to do with, okay, now what's the next thing that the youth of this generation need to be striving for, as far as progressive values, and I wonder if part of it was was trans essentially being the next frontier that the youth of that age could work toward. Um, yeah, that I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
factors, and then later
Yes.
on, I think another reason I think a lot of the explosion happened around 15, 16 had to do with a lot with the right wing rising around that time, and the kind of Trumpianism brewing, and I think a lot of the generology stuff is partially a reaction, a left
Yeah,
wing reaction to that whatever
definitely.
was brewing around Trumpism.
Definitely. And yeah, things really kind of took on a lot more steam around then. I also think there's this other, and it's hard to pin down, but this kind of academic stuff around queer theory
Hmm.
was really making its way in. That may have been another more, again, a slightly more elusive trend, but I think it was there. So, queer theory and Judith Butler and, performativity and all that stuff started entering the lexicon, or probably in the early 2000s. And, and again, I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about how this was kind of that kind of thinking, that kind of framework was really confined to the university campuses, and then it sort of escaped into the wider culture. So queer
Mhm.
studies and all that would have been a part of it too. So again, many different
Yeah, I think 2015
threads.
roughly was when here in Canada the SOGI 1, 2, 3 curriculum in schools was introduced
Okay.
as well. So yeah, and that was very based on queer theory. Um, so yeah, so that I would think that would be a factor too. Once you start trying to package these really complex ideas from academia into a curriculum for 5-year-olds,
Hmm.
yeah, you have to package those ideas in this really simple. I would argue there's never an age appropriate way to introduce queer theory to children, but
Hmm.
a simple language and simple concepts that I
Yeah.
think is confusing a lot of kids.
Hmm. Yeah. I
And I
mean,
wonder if I
go
was just gonna
ahead.
say those kind of the purveyors of the academic kind of um, version of queer theory, if they were one of the few to get highly online once we all had smartphones in our hands. And I wonder if that's part of how it was, disseminated at the same time all these 13-year-olds are getting smartphones in their
Hmm.
hands. I'm
Right.
not sure if there's any correlation there, but
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, the truth is that these are really interesting ideas. And I think when you're, 11, 12, 13, you're a smart kid, you're starting to get interested in interesting ideas. You want to understand who you are. That's, part of what comes up in adolescence is you understand like life is a little more complicated than you thought it was when you were 8. And you start to want to develop your own ideas a little bit. And then there's this incredible medium of, let's say, Tumblr, where these ideas, like you were saying, are kind of offered in these bite-sized chunks that sound really, I mean, they sound really interesting, and they are interesting. Um, a little incoherent, but still interesting.
Well, the incoherence, I wonder if that's a part of it. I know in
A part of the appeal.
a part of the appeal, like what I have a background in design and marketing, and one of the things we learned is that the use of illustrations or more abstract depictions of humans actually increases or lowers the threshold for people to relate to that character, because you're not being very specific. If you're drawing a stick person, most people can project themselves onto a stick person because there aren't specific features. Whereas if you introduce a photograph of a specific person, then fewer people are going to identify with that person. So I think the fact that these ideas are very kind of vague and elusive is part of how so many people can project themselves into it.
That's a really great insight. That feels just right to me, that there's so many different ways to look at this stuff, and that the whole thing that we have around gender is such a incredible, and I want to say like rich mishmash of ideas and theories, that you can sort of see yourself reflected in it somehow. And that must be very appealing if you're maybe a kind of socially isolated young person.
Because young people seem to be getting very emotionally hooked into these ideas, not just intellectually hooked, right?
Absolutely.
So the fact that they're interesting ideas is certainly that intellectual hook. But when you start connecting it with ideas of you're an oppressor, and if you're a cis person, those very emotional ideas, and then hearing stories about the oppression of trans people or the oppression of gay and lesbian people, nobody wants to identify as the oppressor. And so I think people do get very emotionally hooked into these ideas as well.
Sure.
So around 2016, you kind of, or about 15, you're kind of seeing it in your local sphere. Is that like, when did you start applying kind of like your professional background into the trans stuff you're seeing?
Well, I think when so my first sense was there was sort of like a social contagion going on. Then I found out that there were actually young people engaging in medical procedures. So if someone asks you when you peaked, for me it was actually a client of mine who said that but she said girls are getting mastectomies at 18, and I was like, I'm done. I'm out. I mean, like the idea of a young person, I remember this, I had this one client whose son adopted a female gender role and was kind of like living in that for the summer. And I forget how old the kid was, but he was a teenager. And my thought at the time was, wow, that's really interesting. What an interesting thing to do, what an interesting life experience to have, how cool that mom is okay with this, that kind of thing. And then it was like, oh, but they're getting medical procedures. I was like, oh no, that's, because to me, with my background as a Jungian, that's what I call a concretization. So, Jung believed, there's some problems with this idea, but I think it's fundamentally true. Jung believed that every woman had a masculine part of her, if you will, an inner man, and every man had an inner woman. So in Jung land, we call that the anima in a man, the sort of feminine part of him. And in a woman, it's the animus, or her masculine counterpart. And in Jungian theory, this is a pretty significant idea. So, and it's considered to be like an important part of us. Jung chose this word, anima means soul in Latin. So it's like not a little thing, right? Your contrasexual aspect is really important. And Jung pretty much says that for you to grow and develop psychospiritually, you're going to need to really develop that part of yourself, have a relationship with that part of yourself, value that part of yourself. So like, I'm all good with that. But Jung also cautioned against repeatedly what he called a concretization of the symbolic process. So for me, the thought of people experimenting with their inner man or their inner woman, I'm like, good. To turn that into something concrete by taking steps to instantiate it, physically, that then we're in different territory as far as I'm concerned. Not that I can't see that there's a time and a place for that. It's not that I think that anyone who transitions that's always wrong. I don't believe that. But I certainly think that it's, so I'm going to just back up for 1 second and talk about this idea of concretization a little bit more.
Mhm.
Like, silly example, but someone comes into analysis in a midlife crisis and he's like, I think I need to buy a Porsche, and like what I would do, again, it's kind of a trite example, but I would definitely want to just explore that impulse with that person. It's like, oh, well, tell me about a Porsche and how long have you wanted a Porsche and what do you imagine it would be like to have a Porsche? And like, we would talk about it, because honestly, that's a kind of concretized impulse in dealing with a sense of loss of potency or impending age and mortality and that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, it still might be right to buy the Porsche. But it's my job, as I see it, is to help the person think about it psychologically. So getting a double mastectomy at 17 is, in my view, it's a concretization of something where there undoubtedly has not been an adequate psychological exploration of what that might mean. So when I learned in 2015, 2016 that their pediatric transition was happening, I was floored. I was surprised that this was happening. What I didn't when I didn't have all the pieces together until I remember, because it was a specific date, February of 2016, when I put together that there was a social contagion and that that was interacting with this affirmative model of care. And that's the intersection that makes this really dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So a social contagion of kids exploring their gender, what, you're going to cut your hair, you're going to change your pronouns, you're going to wear different clothes. I mean, that's exploration, right? That's normal. It's normal for teens to explore. That's a kind of exploration. That's not a problem for me. Then you've got affirmative care. And again, if affirmative care were reserved for a tiny number of genuinely super dysphoric kids, I don't know, maybe that would be okay. I'd have to think about that more. But certainly if it were, as it was traditionally reserved for a very small number of people, at least the damage would be minimized. I just want to say I'm not really sure there should ever be transition of kids. I want that to be clear. But at least as it was practiced 30 years ago, it was a very small number of people. But you add those two things together, a social contagion plus affirmative care, and then you've got a problem. And it captured me right away because, I think of this as my backyard. I mean, affirmative care and the way it's being played out in the psychotherapy field, to me, has eviscerated my profession, because affirmative care is not therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it has de-psychologized psychotherapeutic treatment. It has, I would even say, deprofessionalized psychotherapeutic treatment. And it's leading to harm. And I believe it may be leading to harm on a very great scale. So it felt important to me to begin to speak on it. I remember kind of taking this in. It started that day in February. I was really chewing on it in March. I was reading blogs. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And I knew that I needed to speak out eventually because I could. I mean, I'm in private practice. There were a lot of things that sort of insulated me from, say, losing a job or something. But I wanted to make sure I was right in what I was seeing. I didn't want to speak out and harm, trans identifying people. I didn't want to harm gender dysphoric people. So I did a lot of research. I talked to trans people. I talked to detransitioners. I was reading all the papers. it was so great because like the scientists would talk to me, like Mike Bailey, it's like Mike Bailey like answered my email, Um, so I was, reading the books, I was reading the literature, I was really trying to just take in as much information as I could. And I thought, well, am I going to do this? And then I realized, I think all I'm saying is that we ought to really be very careful before we go about sterilizing gay and lesbian kids. I said, if that's really my message, and that seems like a pretty straightforward message, so I think I can do this. So I came out. Silly. I think it was like September of 2016 in a blog on Fourth Wave Now blog post.
Okay. I mean, I know that even now, speaking out about these things, you can expect some backlash. I can only imagine what the reception was at the time. What was the worst of the backlash for you?
I mean, people always talk about the backlash, and it's not that it hasn't happened, but I also want to make it clear that I don't think it's usually as bad as people think it is. I mean, I'd actually be really interested in what your guys' experience has been, although I imagine that, I don't know, you guys are just probably in the hardest situation of all, honestly. So you may have had a really hard time with it, but I certainly had some very bruising interactions with people who were very disappointed. I have certainly lost friends. I have had very vague threats on social media, like, yeah, somebody should figure out where she lives, on Reddit or something. And it's like, but it's not like anyone shown up at my house and firebombed it or anything. I mean, yeah, there's some nasty comments on social media by trans activists. The most painful, difficult thing is people that know me in person, that I was friends with, who shun me or exclude me or tell me they can't be friends with me. That's always the hard thing. Mm-hmm. But then there's the other side of it, which is so many people contact you and say, my God, thank you so much. I admire you so much. This is so important what you're saying.
That's true. That's a good point. And I would say that even for us, I would say the majority of the feedback that we've received has been positive and supportive. Right. I mean, yes, there's been some nasty interactions.
Yes.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think a lot of people see this problem. They don't necessarily know how to articulate it. They don't necessarily know what to do about it, but they see something's gone off the rails and something doesn't feel right, but don't know. So when they hear someone else talk about it, it's like, yes, finally somebody is giving words to what I'm perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's people like you and I, Aaron, people who are trans, we sort of have what I call like a get out of jail free card. It's like we are able to say things that other people would be, shunned for much less. So I have like friends in real life who've called me transphobic. They are not trans themselves, and they're calling me trans. So that's funny, but it's very rare. Mostly it's people going, "Oh wow, okay, he's saying that," And so I think that there's some sort of we've got more leeway by not being cis, like we're allowed to speak on things. And I also think that maybe, this is why I started doing this, is because it does give other people permission to, I was like, oh, this person's trans and they're saying it. So now it makes it a little bit more okay. How much of that's happening, I don't know, but
yeah.
I waited. I think the difficulty for us is I mean, I wasn't really connected to the trans community, so it wasn't really much of a loss of a community, but it would have been like if I had been connected to the community, it would have been loss of community, and it would have made accessing services very difficult. So I'm at a point in my transition where I'm no longer dependent on the services, and I waited until that was the case to say anything, because I was concerned, like, when surgeons are making kind of comments of, that they've totally bought into this ideology and you're speaking out against the ideology, I wouldn't have felt comfortable working with those surgeons or those physicians anymore. But even sending Aaron Terrell to the WPATH conference in Montreal recently, just for introducing himself, he was removed from the conference.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So loss of community is instant when you can't even access, a conference about trans health as a trans person.
You were removed from the conference just for being there.
Well, so I did ask. I was never told exactly why I was removed, but I introduced myself the first day, and there was like a lot of abuse, basically saying that I was a TERF and things like that, just by being affiliate, because I'm representing Gender Dysphoria Alliance, and we were called a hate group, and that I was a TERF, and nothing that I was saying was genuine, and so there was just like a lot of that from supposedly professional people, and then the next day. I realized because I'd gotten all that in this like trans forum section, like different like affinity groups or different like breakout rooms, because it was all happening virtually, at least from my registration. But the next day, I think this was the last day of the conference, because I was the virtual portion of it. I'm getting my times wrong here. But anyway, it was the last day, I believe, that I made this post that basically just said, trans people concerned about affirmation only approach to pediatric transition. And then in there I asked, what are providers doing to ensure, using their language, I said, what are providers doing to ensure cis children aren't being transitioned unnecessarily? And I was removed within minutes of posting that. So it wasn't just introducing myself, but it was like there was nothing offensive or like, yeah, I was removed. We should have had access to the virtual archive of that conference for 300 days after. No, I think it was 60 days after the fact. But as soon as I was removed, which would have been very beneficial to GDA to have that resource and to be able to write about it after the fact, and we can all parse through it. But because I was removed immediately after making that post, we didn't have access to that resource anymore of the rest of the conference, and we weren't refunded for the registration fee, and no explanation was given for my removal. So just for asking, what are providers doing to ensure cis children aren't transitioning?
I followed up just to say, like, show me what he did, that was offensive or broke community guidelines. Show me what he did, or give us a refund. And they haven't replied. So
that is outrageous.
That's where we stand with.
There's really no room within that organization, which is important to note. I mean, that's an important organization. There's really no room for genuine dialogue or question.
Well, it's especially surprising, I think, because, Aaron, the question that you posed actually fits really well with the standards of care that were released, because they made changes to the adolescent chapter. They are recommending comprehensive assessment for adolescents. So I think, your question of what are you doing to ensure, that some safekeeping is happening with adolescents, that would have been the perfect opportunity for them to launch into
answer it
according to the standards of care, and why they are recommending a comprehensive, assessment and an exploratory approach for kids and adolescents. But so that was a very bizarre and heavy-handed.
Yeah, and I screenshot all of it. So like I have the thread that I created, and then the app that you access the conference through, there's a glitch in it where I was getting notifications within the message threads popping up on my phone. But when I would click into them, then it would tell me I wasn't registered and I couldn't access the actual full message. But I was getting these push notifications of messages, many of which were saying, take this down. Like, why is he still here? This is making me feel unsafe. Like things like that were just coming through. And I was, and one of the organizers responded and just said, Aaron Terrell has been removed from the conference. I will take the thread down. And then it was like multiple messages later, it's still there. Why isn't anybody taking this down? Like, they seemed distressed about that question just sitting there. Like multiple people being like, you need to fix this. Like, we shouldn't have to read this. It was really bizarre. Yeah.
It's a culture of such fragility.
Yes. And I think, it sort of relates to this topic in a way of psychic epidemic, because there's something about having to kind of defend against some knowledge that's wrapped up in that. So people, I mean, the thing about psychic epidemics, if you want to call it that, which is related to a social contagion, is that it is usually involves some kind of fixed belief system, like an ideology, and the ideology kind of binds the anxiety. And so then you have to defend against any challenge to that ideology, because if you allow it to be challenged, your anxieties might come crashing back. So these are all kind of interconnected ideas.
Okay.
But yeah, that the thought that there are trans people out there saying, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be transitioning kids, creates such profound anxiety in people. I mean, why? That's an important question to ask.
Yeah. So how is the psychic epidemic like, it's related to social contagion, but different as well? I mean, because psychic epidemic comes from Jung, doesn't it?
Yeah,
That concept.
yeah.
Can you explain
Yeah.
a little bit about what psychic epidemics specifically are?
Well, I mean, I think that's his term for what we might more generally call a mass hysteria. And I suppose that, there can be sort of contagious behaviors like suicide or even eating disorders. But a mass hysteria is maybe a little bit more involves behaviors, but as well ideas and beliefs. And I guess one of the classic examples is McCarthyism. Yeah, and that wonderful play, The Crucible, kind of gives you a picture of that.
Yeah, if anyone hasn't read or watched The Crucible, definitely do that. I read it a couple of years ago, and I was just like, oh, here we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And of course, he wrote that as a parable for McCarthyism.
Mm-hmm.
So someone was telling me the other day about how McCarthyism ended. And there was some senator, I can't remember his name right now, but he stood up and he said to McCarthy, "Sir, you ought to be ashamed of yourself." And it just kind of ended right there.
I think it was at long last, have you no sense of decency?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
yeah.
It's quoted in an REM song. That's why it's stuck in my head.
Oh, okay.
I remember hearing it actually, but yeah. I think that's what we need to do. Public shaming.
Well, or I don't even say shaming as much as kind of like demanding accountability.
Right.
The thing about The Crucible that's so relevant is that, and I haven't read it in a million years, Erin, so you can, correct me, but the girls go along with it kind of to save their own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And so it both protects them, and then also they get to kind of score points off of it. Mm-hmm. So there are so many people just kind of going along with this, either because they're afraid to dissent or because somehow they benefit from it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because if you dissent, you were then likely the next target, and so
that's right. Yes.
Right, and so you don't want to. You know it's wrong, and you're terrified, but you don't want to risk being the next target.
Right.
And that's why it goes on and on.
Plus, like you were saying before, both of you are called Erin, so it's really hard to refer to what one of you said before. But what you said before, Erin, Kimberly, about it, like it's highly emotive. And I mean, I think for the, say, teen girls getting swept up in it, that's a huge thing. If you look at mass hysterias, if you go to like the Wikipedia article on mass hysteria, they list like 20 mass hysterias or something. And if you look through them, in my knowledge, most of them have primarily been most of the population where it really happened was in adolescent girls. So there's something about adolescent girls where, when we're adolescents, we are very susceptible to suggestion and to these kind of sweeping emotions that, again, get communicated from person to person. There's this concept called co-rumination, where, and there was this New York Times article about it a number of years ago. So mostly when you're upset about something, talking to someone else about it, it tends to make you feel better, which is kind of the whole basis for therapy. But there's an exception to that. When you engage in co-rumination, you emerge from the encounter feeling worse. And what co-rumination looks like is, as the term implies, you get together with someone and you're upset about something and you kind of gin each other up. And I saw an example of this right after the 2016 election. My daughter was, however old she was at the time, she was a teenager, and she sang in this like wonderful youth choir, and it was an all girls choir. And she went to choir that night, and instead of rehearsing the piece, they all sort of mourned Trump's election together. And I picked her up and she was really distraught, and that her friends, she was like, oh, my friends who are, they're going to get deported, and, and this person's going to suffer from this. And I mean, listen, I'm no fan of Trump, but it was such a great example of co-rumination and how it can lead to a kind of hysteria. Like, it didn't make anyone feel better that they got together and talked about how terrible it was that Trump got elected. It made everyone feel worse. It tended to kind of lean toward catastrophizing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a behavior that teen girls engage in more than any other demographic group. So teen boys don't tend to get together and wring their hands over things. It doesn't tend to happen. Adult women don't tend to do this to the same degree, but teen girls will get together and kind of enter into each other's emotional experience about whatever the issue is. And then the feeling of awfulness gets magnified and communicated throughout the social group. So that's maybe another piece of this.
I know a lot of that has to do with females in general being much more empathetic than males. But I'm wondering, why is it though that doesn't extend to women? Like, why is it so intense in adolescent girls, but then like sort of is grown out of? Like, what is that?
Well, first of all, I think that probably some adult women do it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can definitely think of times. It's not that it totally goes away. However, one of the big things that happens when we're teenagers is we learn affect regulation. We learn to regulate our emotions. There are two really big times in our development that we learn affect regulation. One is toddlerhood, right? Toddlers have like big explosive emotions, and it's the parents' job to kind of contain that and teach them how to regulate a little bit. That's what basically tantrums are, where the little kid totally just deregulates and can't manage their responses at all. The other time that really comes up again is in adolescence, and this is true for males and females. But you're right, Aaron Terrell. It is this question of, sort of girls being much more empathic, and there is evidence that this is innate, by the way. It doesn't mean every female's like that, but generally speaking, on a population level, we probably are more hardwired to empathize. And then we're also feeling very strong emotions and not so good at putting those in perspective yet. So I guess that would be part of it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think that one important thing for
Sorry,
people to
what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think one important thing for people to understand about a social contagion, it's not that people are just faking it. Like it's not like a malingering situation where people are aware that I'm going to put this on in order to achieve an end. It's a very subconscious thing that happens. I wonder too about some of the parallels maybe between a social contagion that involves, a health condition like this, and a conversion disorder. I was at a conversion disorder conference years ago and became very interested in the concept. But one of the things they said is that the pathway is usually people feel a very strong, uncomfortable emotions. So they might be saying to a therapist, I'm really struggling with anxiety, for example. And then they develop these physical symptoms, and the emotional aspects just disappear. But the disease course, the sort of pseudo disease course, tends to mimic a disease course that they've witnessed or experienced in the past. And so it's very highly suggestible. And I think a mistake a lot of people make in treatment, because I was working for a neuropsych unit where there was an individual with pseudo seizures. So he had a conversion disorder, was having these fake seizures, but from the outside eye, they looked exactly like real seizures. but there was no seizure activity in the brain. But the response that some of the staff was taking is every time he had one of these seizures, they would rush in and as if he was having a real seizure, and they would treat it as though he was having a real seizure. And in just the first week that I was there, he went from having these seizures once in a while to several times a day because it's so highly suggestible.
That I'm so glad you brought that up. There's so many things I want to respond to there. That is a totally fascinating story. I envy you for having that experience. But maybe I'll take the last thing first, which is it really matters. And you know, in that book, Strange Contagion, he talks about this exact point. It matters how you respond to it, because if you give it lots of attention and you respond to it as if it's what the person says it is, you really reinforce it. So, for example, the laughing disease, and I think it was in Tanzania, maybe in was it in the 60s or the 70s? Again, it was adolescent girls, and there was this one school. I might be getting the details wrong. I'm really sorry if I am, but just let's just glide along here. I think it was an all-girls school in Tanzania, and these girls started having these kind of fits of hysterical laughter that were, making it impossible for them to stay in class and that kind of thing. And it spread to more and more and more girls. And what they made two big mistakes. They closed the school, sending all these girls home to their villages, and they called in international experts. And there's this thing called social referencing where if when you have a little kid, right, and they fall down, they fall down like an 18-month-old will toddle along and then fall down and then look at you. They'll look at mom, and if you go, they start to cry, and if you go, you're okay, they get back up and they keep playing. So so it's we're always looking to people to say how serious is this? It's an unconscious thing. So these girls are having these these kind of hysterical laughing, truly hysterical in the psychiatric sense. And what happens is they call an international authority. So it's yes, this is a big emergency. So it just kind of reinforces it, and then it just spread further, rather than if you take it seriously, because like you said, Erin, they're not faking it. The suffering is real. It just doesn't have the same genesis that they think it has. So if you take the suffering seriously and you're really compassionate, but you don't kind of validate the story about where the suffering's coming from, and you kind of demand a little bit of responsibility there, then it can resolve. I think it's sort of there's compassion, and then there's but there's also responsibility. So that's one thing I want to say to that story. And it is this interplay between sort of suggestibility and just the nature of psychic distress. So the nature of psychic distress is that it's kind of amorphous, or I've described it somewhere as protean. Distress is distress and it's real. But then how do we manage to basically express that distress? I mean, I think it's deeply biological, actually, that when you're feeling distress of one kind or another, you need to find a way to communicate it. And this is unconscious. So, I mean, even animals do this, right? If you have a dog, and the dog starts not feeling well, you just notice subtle behavioral changes. I mean, it's got to be so important, and especially humans. I mean, we're such social creatures. We need to communicate our distress to each other so that we can get help and care. So how are we going? We're having emotional distress. How do we communicate that? I mean, we can talk about it, but how do we even formulate it? And really, it sort of is this generalized thing that we can then give meaning and structure to, but the meaning and structure is largely provided by culture. So in the Middle Ages, one of the most popular mental health, one of the most common mental health disorders was called the glass. Well, I don't know what it was called, but now we refer to it as the glass delusion. So there was some king some king of France. I can't remember his name right now. It may have been, I don't remember which one, the 9th or something, Charles. Anyway, he developed this belief that he was made of glass. So periodically he would have to be wrapped in very soft fabrics and carried about because he was worried he was going to break. Well, after him, it sort of spread, and it was mostly in the upper classes, and it became very, very common. Well, now it's like with that is exceedingly rare to find someone who believes, that he or she is made of glass. Now we have other ways. So this medical historian named Edward Shorter developed this concept of the symptom pool. So what he says is that when you feel distress, you need to figure out, unconsciously, you go through a process where you find a way to express it that will that is culturally understood and validated and will result in you getting care. So if I were to say I'm made of glass, like people would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But if you say I'm gender dysphoric, people immediately know what that is, and they're immediately going to tune in and take it seriously. So there's something about like what's in the symptom pool. And like you're saying, Erin Kimberly, like seizures were in the symptom pool. And so this became like a viable way of getting care, attention, and treatment for this distress. That was very real, but it wasn't actually a seizure. I think it's really fascinating.
Whereas my approach with this individual was sort of say, like, I noticed that this is getting worse for you. That's unfortunate, because when I first started working with him, I was taking him out for coffee and doing things like that. And I was saying, well, it's unfortunate that because you're having these episodes so frequently now, we're not able to go for coffee anymore, and really kind of reinforcing some of the cost of that behavior, right? And trying to reinforce, this would be so much better if we were still able to go out and do those things, and taking a much more emotionally neutral approach with him, not an alarmist approach.
That's a perfect word for it. Is that when we get really alarmed, it tends to actually reinforce the behavior. So how did that go? Your approach?
I wasn't there long enough to see sort of the long-term trajectory, but I would notice, like, for example, there was a time, because you could usually see the pseudo seizures starting. They were usually warning signs. And so I was sitting there, I was experimenting a little bit, and we were talking about I asked him, how does your family deal with emotions? Like, do your parents talk about emotions? How does that happen in your family? And he started to have these warning signs of a seizure in the context of that conversation. Mm-hmm. And then so I immediately kind of switched to a more neutral, less emotional conversation, and he walked right out of those symptoms. So he didn't end up having a pseudo seizure.
So you can see that the pseudo seizures were doing all kinds of work for him. They were getting him care and attention. They were also helping him to avoid something painful and defend against feeling. And I mean, I think you can see that also with these, say, trans-identifying adolescent girls who, a lot of the times, there's so much that the trans identification is doing. It's helping them separate from mom at a time that they're supposed to be separating from mom. And it's like, I'm so much not like you that I'm not even a woman. But then, I mean, it's very scary to separate from your parents. And there's an ambivalence around it. And the trans identification allows you to kind of put the stake in the ground. I'm not like you. But actually, a lot of these parents get so activated when these kids come out, and the whole family starts to kind of orbit around the kid and the trans identification. It takes up so much time and concern that it must be incredibly gratifying to these teens who suddenly really have their mom's full attention or their parents' full attention. So it's doing that work. And also, Erin Kimberly, as per your case, it might help them avoid developmental challenges. Like, it's time to get your license. You've got to start worrying about your grades. Maybe it's time to start thinking about, college or getting a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And, these kids can be very regressed in terms of these normal developmental things, and being trans can kind of become the excuse for not doing those things, in essence. So it's doing a lot of kind of work in the person's life.
I've noticed a lot of the youth that I've worked with who identify as trans, a lot of them, there's sort of consistent patterns that I've noticed. And one of them is that these young people can't imagine a future. If you start asking them questions about what career do you want in the future, like what kind of person do you want to be in the future, they really struggle to answer those questions. And not all youth at that age have trouble answering those questions. But it's a pattern I've noticed with those that I think fit more the ROGD profile and pattern.
And how do you understand that?
Not being able to understand a future for
Yeah,
themselves.
not being able to have an image of the future. What is that antecedent to the trans identification? Is that a result of it? What do you?
Well, it also seems to go part and parcel with not much of a healthy socialization. Most of them are gaming and online, and so their concept of self seems to be based on this sort of virtual reality more than real reality. So they're not engaged in like real life hobbies and social interaction. And so I guess I've related, because how do you imagine a future as a anime avatar?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like they don't have a picture of themselves out in the world. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense to me.
In terms of historical examples of some psychic epidemics or mass hysterias, in terms of the course of them, to give us a little bit of hope in this situation, because all of those hysterias have ended eventually. I mean, of course, as you mentioned earlier, the danger of this one is that we're providing medical interventions. So, when it eventually ends, I think we're going to have a lot of people regretting these medical interventions. I think it's a fear that a lot of us share. But is there anything that you can think of just from looking at some of those historical examples? So the one that comes to mind for me because of the involvement of therapists is the dissociative identity disorder hysteria that happened when the book Sybil and then the movie Sybil was released. So we saw similar trends, right? And these numbers of people stepping forward saying, I have this, and presenting with symptoms. And that eventually did end. Like, what do you think we could learn from some of those past hysterias that we could maybe apply to this case?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's something I'd love to kind of get my hands around because I started training to be a therapist in the 90s, and which was sort of at the tail end of the DID stuff, and also the the false memories stuff. And so I'd sort of seen it, and then to realize that this was sort of like another go around was kind of depressing because it made me realize that the field hasn't learned, so yeah. So I mean, I'd love for there to be a post-mortem on this, and for the field to really take in that we have to have a different approach. And I have some thoughts about that. But unfortunately, I think the DID in particular, and false memories, I think it was lawsuits. But there has to be evidence of harm that is, and I think this is terrible, but I think it's just how it is. There has to be evidence of harm that is so widespread and incontrovertible that people can't keep their head in, people can't stay behind the veil of ideology any longer and have to admit, this is happening and it's harming people. And I think we're getting there. And it's terrible to say, but I also think, back in 2016, I was talking about this and people were like, what? And now people are like, oh yeah, I know like 3 kids who, who are transitioning right now. And it's like, it's so everywhere that I find it hard to imagine that most people are not seeing that it's a social contagion because it's so widespread. So in some ways, I feel like this is a terrible thing to say, but even when it's getting worse, it's getting better. And I hate the fact that, that it may have to get worse before it gets better, but I think that might be true. And I always say to people, like today, X number of kids will come out to their parents as trans. And some of those parents will be legislators or judges or, academics or policymakers or journalists. And, at the end of today, X many more people will get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do find that many people don't, of the liberal persuasion, it's like in the abstract, it sounds like such a good idea to support trans kids and, let them be who they want to be. And it's like, how can you argue with that? But the day it happens to your kid, you suddenly get what's going on. You don't when it's someone else's kid, you just think, well, yeah, there's such a thing as trans kids and her kid must be one of those. When it's your kid, you're like, this is not what my kid is, and oh my God, I'm staring down the barrel of these irreversible medical procedures that my kid wants tomorrow. So I think that, it's terrible that that's what it takes to wake people up, but that does tend to wake people up, and it is happening to more and more people every day.
Yeah.
One final question, and to do with what you just referenced earlier, before we wrap up. What you said, you've got some thoughts on what that post-mortem reckoning within the psychological field is going to be. What is that? What is that going to look like?
Okay.
What do you predict?
I'm glad you asked me that question. Well, so first of all, I think that it's I've never seen this discussed anywhere. It's something I've thought a lot about since I've gone down this rabbit hole. Nearly all symptoms of psychiatric or mental health disorders are either subjective or behavioral. So they are almost 100% susceptible to suggestion or to kind of medical shaping or even to malingering or kind of being developed like a conversion disorder. So for example, if I have a really sore throat and I go to the doctor and I say, I have strep throat and I want antibiotics, the doctor is going to do a culture, find the little bug that's causing my sore throat, and give me an antibiotic to kill that bug. If I go to a therapist and I say I'm really depressed, I want electroconvulsive therapy, thank God most therapists are going to say, well, let's talk about this a little bit more. But depression is purely subjective experience. It's purely subjective. The only way that I know I have depression is because of how I'm feeling, and I can communicate that to someone else. There's no blood test for it. There's no, like you were saying, Erin, this guy was having seizures, but there were no seizure activity in the brain. So if you think about, gender dysphoria, anxiety, depression, all of these things, I mean, you might have physiological effects from anxiety, but it's still a kind of negotiation between a feeling state, a subjective feeling state, and your body. It isn't this kind of very cut and dry, pathogen. So there's lots of different, it's all very fungible. It makes me go back to this word protean. It's like it can take different forms. It can move around like a conversion disorder. It starts as mental distress and it moves into the body. And I think we know that, but I don't think we give that enough credence, because we have adopted the medical model in mental health where we think about it analogously to having strep throat. Having depression is not having strep throat. And I'm not, I mean, this kind of leads into a discussion about psychiatric medication, which is like a whole other thing. I'm not anti-psychiatric medication, but it's not taking an antibiotic for strep throat. It's not a silver bullet that's like formulated specifically for that one symptom. And some medications might be helpful for some disorders in some people, but we've adopted this wholesale way of thinking. We've transferred it from the body onto the psyche, and it just doesn't help, because part of the relevance is, if you see someone having a seizure and they're actually having a seizure, there is a way to treat that. If you see someone having a seizure and they're not having a seizure, treating it like it's a seizure will make it worse. So, when someone's having a gender dysphoria, treating it like, well, let me just, sort of act like this is what it is, right? It's just the most superficial way of understanding this experience. So let me change your body and turn you into someone who looks like the opposite sex, and that will fix everything. It's an incredibly kind of concrete way of looking at things, because it's a medicalized way of looking at things that doesn't take into account the kind of nature of psychic reality. So that's one thing, is I think we have to really get clear on the fact that these are all subjective experiences, or almost 100% are subjective experiences. I also think, and this may be related, I think it is related, is that we need to be aware of the symbolic level of how we navigate the world, because we are symbolic beings. We do operate symbolically, essentially. I mean, and that it's just the nature of being human, right? We've always had these big symbolic stories and myth and everything. Well, symptoms are symbolic. Psychiatric symptoms are symbolic. I mean, they may be other things too, but they're definitely symbolic. Like Aaron, I'd love to talk more about this case with you, but my guess is that there's a particular reason why his psyche landed on seizures. It wound up doing a lot of good work for him. It was kind of fulfilling some important functions. But my guess is, if we peel back the story, there's also a way that it symbolized something true. So it was a true expression of something, but not literally, but symbolically. So, I think, gender dysphoria is fascinating when you consider what it might mean symbolically, but we're just taking it literally. And I think that is probably a key feature in many psychic epidemics, is that the thing is taken literally, and there's this symbolic space around it to consider what else it might be is collapsed. So that's where I would start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I feel like we could talk for another hour, but thank you so much for joining us today and spending this time with us. It's been fascinating.
It was great talking to you guys. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.